The sky was so clear that morning it felt almost painted. A canvas of soft blue stretched endlessly above us. The air in the mountains had that crisp bite that makes your lungs ache in the best way. The kind of freshness that makes you feel more alive than you have in years. I remember thinking it was the perfect day for a hike. The perfect way to celebrate 40 years with Thomas. Our son Mark and his wife Rachel had invited us, saying they wanted to make our anniversary special. Laughter, photos, a picnic, those were the promises. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe them. The trail crunched under our boots. Birds chattered overhead, and Rachel skipped a few steps ahead with her camera swinging at her side. She had that bright, eager smile plastered on her face, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. Mark stayed close, his voice steady, reassuring. He told us to walk a little closer to the cliff's edge, said the view was better from there, said he'd be right behind us if we stumbled. His tone was smooth, so practiced, and against my better judgment, I trusted him. After all, he was my son. How do you doubt your own child? Thomas squeezed my hand as we stepped back toward the ledge. My stomach knotted when the ground shifted slightly beneath my boots, pebbles skittering into the abyss below. The valley stretched wide and endless, breathtaking and terrifying all at once. Rachel lifted her camera, her voice lilting, almost too sweet, as she told us to smile. I felt the unease crawl higher in my chest, but Mark's hand touched my back, and for a split second, I let myself relax. Then it happened. A shove not gentle, not steadying, but sharp and deliberate. The world vanished from beneath me. Sky, air, rushing wind. Then the sickening, weightless drop that stole the breath from my lungs. In that instant, there was no denying it. My own son had pushed us. The son I had cradled, raised, fed, forgiven. The boy I had once believed was just quiet, misunderstood. Pain exploded when we hit the rocks, and the world blurred into fragments of sound, Rachel crying out about an accident. Mark's calm voice already rehearsing the lie. I wanted to scream, but Thomas's hand found mine, and I heard his broken whisper telling me to stay still, to play dead. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my family shattered, and to understand how we reached that cliff, how betrayal took root inside my own home. I need to take you back to the years when shadows first began to form in our lives. Looking back, it almost feels like another lifetime, the years before everything fell apart. Thomas and I built a modest life together in a small town where everyone knew each other's names. He worked with his hands in carpentry, shaping raw wood into something lasting, while I spent my days at the local elementary school, guiding curious children through their lessons. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, safe, and filled with the kind of simple joys most people dream of. Our home was always alive with the sound of our boys. David, our firstborn, had a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. He was quick to help, always asking questions, dreaming about building bridges and making a mark on the world. His energy filled the room like sunlight pouring through a window. Mark, our younger son, was different. He was quieter, more withdrawn, as if he carried a world inside that he rarely let us see. He didn't smile as easily as David, but I told myself children blossom in their own time. I believed he would find his voice, his light, when he was ready. Our Sundays after church were my favorite. We'd gather around the oak table Thomas had crafted himself, its surface worn smooth by years of family meals. David would tell us stories about his classes, his eyes alive with excitement, while Mark sat silently, picking at his food. Sometimes I wished he would join in, offer even a small piece of his world to us, but I convinced myself it was just his nature, and that love meant accepting him as he was. There were moments, though, when shadows crept into that picture. I would catch the two boys whispering in the hallway, their voices sharp and hushed, only to stop abruptly when I walked in, their faces tight. David's frustration, Mark's guarded expression, it unsettled me, but Thomas brushed it off as normal brotherly disagreements. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. For years, I thought we had carved out something steady and good, a family story written in simple, steady lines. But beneath the warmth, cracks were forming that I was too blind, or too hopeful, to acknowledge. And one autumn evening, those cracks widened in a way that would break our lives apart forever when David never came home. That autumn evening is burned into my memory in a way I can never erase. The light outside faded to dusk, and I kept glancing at the clock, expecting to hear David's footsteps on the porch. He was always good about calling if he was running late. So when the minutes turned into hours, my stomach twisted with unease. I told myself he was probably with friends, caught up in laughter, losing track of time. But as the night stretched on, that quiet reassurance gave way to panic. Thomas rallied some neighbors, and they set out with flashlights, combing the streets, the trails, every corner of the town where David might have wandered. I stayed behind, pacing the floor, whispering prayers into the silence. Mark remained in his room, saying he had homework, though when I checked on him, the look in his eyes unsettled me. There was fear there, yes, but also something colder, harder to name. At dawn, the search ended. They found him at the bottom of a rocky gorge just outside of town. The authorities said he must have stumbled in the dark, that it was a tragic accident no one could have prevented. Those words washed over me like ice water. I collapsed under their weight, my body shaking as I tried to grasp a world where my bright, beautiful boy was simply gone. His funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the same black dress I had once worn to my mother's service, but this grief was heavier, more suffocating. I sobbed until I could no longer stand, and Thomas held me upright, whispering words meant to keep me from falling apart. The church was filled with faces blurred by tears, voices muffled by my own broken sobs. Yet through it all, I couldn't stop watching Mark. He sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Not a single tear slid down his cheek. I told myself everyone grieves differently, that maybe his way was quiet, internal, but deep inside, that stillness chilled me. In the weeks that followed, I clung desperately to the idea that life had to go on. I convinced myself that David's death was a tragic twist of fate, nothing more. I wanted so badly to believe that, but in the quiet hours of the night, when sleep refused to come, doubt whispered to me. It told me that something about that night was not as simple as an accident, and though I buried that doubt to survive, it lingered like a shadow, one that would follow us into the years ahead, shaping everything that came next. The years after David's death moved in a blur, as if grief itself had softened the edges of life. For a long time, I stumbled through each day carrying the weight of absence. Yet strangely, during that hollow period, Mark began to change, or at least That's what I wanted to believe. He started helping Thomas in the workshop, sanding wood, asking questions, showing interest where once there had only been silence. He carried groceries for me, checked in more often, even smiled now and then. I told myself tragedy had matured him, forced him to step into the role of the only son left to us. And in those quiet evenings, when he lingered at the table and spoke about his plans for the future, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could still have a family, even in David's absence. When Mark met Rachel, a lively young woman with a warmth that filled the room, it felt like the final step in that healing. Their wedding was modest but beautiful, and when their children came, I allowed myself to think we had been given a second chance. The laughter of grandchildren in our home patched over wounds I thought would never close. We celebrated birthdays, shared Sunday dinners, and even opened a small family business together. To outsiders, we looked like a family who had survived the unthinkable and come out stronger. But if I am honest, there were cracks. Moments when Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. Times when his generosity felt rehearsed, too carefully displayed. I brushed these thoughts away, telling myself I was only haunted by grief, suspicious because I was afraid to lose again. I clung desperately to the picture of a son transformed. Then one night, years later, Thomas broke the silence we had carried for too long. He told me he had seen it that awful day. He had witnessed Mark and David arguing near the gorge. He had seen the shove, the fall, and he had buried that truth out of fear, out of denial, out of a desperate need to protect what little remained. His words struck me like lightning, shattering the fragile story I had built around us. Everything, every smile, every Sunday dinner, every memory of so-called healing was painted over lies. My heart collapsed under the weight of betrayal, not just from Mark, but from Thomas too, for carrying that secret. And as the truth settled in, a new pattern began to reveal itself. Mark's attentiveness, his charm, his so-called devotion, it hadn't been love. It had been a mask, one he wore while quietly nurturing something darker inside greed. And that greed was about to show itself in ways I could no longer ignore. At first, the changes came in small requests that seemed harmless. Mark asked if Thomas and I could sign over a piece of land we weren't using, insisting it would help expand the family business. He framed it as a smart move for the future, and for a while, I convinced myself it was simply ambition. But little by little, those requests grew heavier, more insistent. Bank documents appeared in front of us, pressure mounting for us to sign without questions. He cloaked it all in words about security, family, and legacy. But beneath his polished tone, I began to sense something sharp and dangerous. Rachel, meanwhile, carried a strange weight in her eyes. At family dinners, she'd sit quietly, her smile faltering whenever Mark spoke too confidently about money or investments. I sometimes caught her glancing at me as if she wanted to say something. But then she'd look away, lips pressed tight. I couldn't tell if she was complicit in his schemes or simply trapped in them. The mask Mark had worn for years was slipping. His charm now felt rehearsed, his generosity transactional. He spoke of money as if it were oxygen, and the more he gained, the more he seemed to hunger for. I could no longer ignore the shadows connecting him to David's death. Back then, I had buried my doubts to survive. But now, with every document signed and every forced smile, those doubts screamed louder. Thomas grew quieter as Mark tightened his grip. And I often wondered if guilt kept him from speaking up, I knew now that his silence had allowed this darkness to grow unchecked, and I resented him for it, even as I feared what would come next. The final straw came when Mark insisted we celebrate our anniversary in a way that felt both grand and strangely hollow. He suggested a hike, saying the view would be unforgettable, that it would be a memory for the whole family. His voice was warm, convincing, but his eyes, those eyes I had once dismissed as guarded, now revealed something colder. I should have recognized it for what it was: not an invitation, but a plan rooted in greed, in the hunger for inheritance, in a need to erase the last barrier between him and everything we had built. And so, with heavy hearts and lingering doubts, Thomas and I agreed to that hike, never imagining it would lead us back to the edge of a cliff, where the truth of Mark's betrayal would finally come to light. I remember the morning of that so-called anniversary hike. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn day that tricks you into thinking everything is fresh and alive. Mark and Rachel smiled too brightly as they loaded the car, as if this outing was a gift for Thomas and me. Something in my chest felt tight, but I told myself not to overthink. After all, what harm could come from a walk with our own son? The trail wound upward, trees thinning as we reached higher ground. My legs burned, but I kept pace with Thomas, his hand brushing mine every so often, steadying me. The wind grew sharper, carrying with it a silence that didn't feel natural. Mark was ahead, urging us forward with that same forced cheer. Rachel lingered near the back, her eyes darting away when I tried to catch them. When the cliff finally opened before us, the view was breathtaking: rolling hills, sunlight breaking through clouds, a hawk circling far below. Mark insisted we stand near the edge for a family photo. I hesitated. The ground looked too loose, too dangerous, but before I could protest, his hand pressed against my back. It wasn't guiding, it was forceful. The world tilted. My body pitched forward. I felt Thomas stumble beside me. A scream caught in my throat as the cliff gave way beneath my shoes. For a moment, weightless terror swallowed me whole. Then pain, jagged and searing, as we crashed against the slope below. Rocks cut into my arms, and every breath burned. I wanted to cry out, but instinct whispered something darker. Stay still, play dead. If they thought we were gone, maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. My cheek rested against cold stone, the taste of iron filling my mouth. Above, I heard muffled voices. Mark's voice, flat and sharp. Rachel's, trembling. They didn't sound like mourners, they sounded like conspirators. Darkness blurred in and out until bright lights seared my eyes. A hospital ceiling. Beeping machines. I realized I had survived. Thomas, too. A young nurse leaned close, her eyes full of determination. She whispered encouragement, saying she had noticed the faintest movement in my hand and refused to let go. That small act of attention saved my life. But survival alone wasn't enough. Truth had to come out. When Thomas finally stirred, he clutched his phone to his chest. He had managed to press record before the fall, capturing Mark's cold admission and Rachel's complicit silence. The evidence was undeniable. The day Mark and Rachel were confronted, their faces cracked like shattered glass. Their performance, years in the making, collapsed under the weight of their own words. The betrayal was no longer hidden. It stood naked in the light. As police led them away, my heart felt torn in two. The nightmare had ended, but healing was only beginning. Justice had finally caught up with them, and for the first time in years, I believed peace might follow. When the police led Mark and Rachel away in handcuffs, I should have felt nothing but relief. And in a way, I did. For years, I had carried a weight I could never quite name, and suddenly, the truth was no longer hiding in the shadows, it stood in the open. Undeniable. Justice had finally come. But relief doesn't erase grief. As the doors of the police car closed, I thought of David. I thought of the boy with the easy smile who never came home that night so many years ago. Nothing could bring him back. Nothing could return the years Thomas and I spent convincing ourselves that Mark was simply broken by tragedy instead of consumed by it. Justice was here, but so was sorrow, and the two tangled together inside me like vines. The house felt different in the weeks that followed, quieter, but also lighter. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking on ground that might suddenly give way beneath me. Thomas and I sat together at the kitchen table, not needing to fill the silence. It was enough to know we had survived. It was enough to know we had each other. Healing doesn't come all at once. Some days I woke with a knot in my chest, thinking of the betrayal. Other days, I woke with gratitude for the small things, the warmth of Thomas's hand, the sound of birds outside our window, the freedom of no longer living under Mark's control. I realized that resilience isn't about forgetting pain, it's about carrying it differently. It's about choosing to honor David by living fully, even when my heart aches. It's about refusing to let betrayal be the last word in our story. There are still moments when I see Mark's face in my dreams, when the memory of that cliff rushes back like a storm. But then, I remind myself, I am still here. Thomas is still here. And David's memory lives on in every breath I take. Justice ended the nightmare. But healing, that's a journey I am still walking. And in that journey, I've come to see that the greatest strength is not in surviving betrayal, but in choosing how to live after it. And that is where I want to take you next, the lessons I've carried from this journey, the truths I wish I had seen sooner, and the hope I want to leave with you. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder how my life could have unfolded so differently if I had listened to the small voice inside me. That quiet whisper, the one that told me something was wrong, even when everything looked fine on the surface. Ignoring it cost me years of peace, and it nearly cost me my life. Betrayal doesn't just wound the heart, it shakes your entire sense of reality. To realize that the hands meant to hold you safe were the very ones pushing you toward destruction. That is a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. And yet, even in that darkness, I found something unexpected, the strength to survive, to rise again, to reclaim my life. If there's one lesson I carry with me, it's this: never silence your instincts. If something feels wrong, trust yourself. Even when others try to convince you otherwise, sometimes our hearts see truths that our eyes refuse to accept. Another lesson is about resilience. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means learning to live with it differently. It means choosing to let grief transform you instead of consume you. I will always mourn David. I will always carry the weight of what Mark did. But I refuse to let those things define the rest of my life. Thomas and I have found a new rhythm in the quiet of our days. We laugh again, though sometimes it's through tears. We honor David by living fully, not by staying frozen in sorrow. We carry the scars of betrayal. Yes, but also the proof that love and survival are stronger than hate and greed. To anyone listening who has felt the sting of betrayal or the heaviness of grief, know this: you are stronger than you think. You can survive the unthinkable. You can rebuild, even if the pieces never fit the same way again. And you can still find peace, even after walking through fire. This is my story, but maybe parts of it are yours too. If it has touched you, if it has made you reflect on your own journey, I ask you to share it. Leave a comment. Let others know they are not alone, and pass this story along. Because sometimes, just knowing someone else has survived can give us the courage to keep going. And that, I believe, is the truest lesson of all.